Hey there! Before we start the podcast, I need you to put down that wavebird and listen up.
I need money.
For a tenth of what the price of that wireless GameCube controller costs,
That should be like $5 if you got it off Shop Goodwill.
you can support me here at the podcast of Two Consoles Too Late.
I need to buy more games.
Your support gets bonus content like additional episodes, Discord server access, typewriter manifestos, and personal shoutouts on the airwaves.
I actually have a typewriter.
So I've decided to make the Patreon free, so all those bonus podcasts and typewriter manifestos, you can have them for free. But if you do support this podcast monetarily, I still will send you a signed postcard, a signed trading card, a Miracle of Save States magnet, and a shout out on the airwaves. Anyway, let's get back to the podcast. Hello! Welcome to the Two Consoles Too Late podcast. I'm the host, Jackson Keebler, and I am Two Consoles Too Late. And what does that mean? At this podcast, we look at the classics and the not-so-classics of retro gaming, often for the very first time and with no nostalgia. Today, we're taking a deep dive and we're looking at an action RPG for the Sega Genesis, Crusader of Centy, released in 1994. We're also going to have some Going Long, an update on the PS1 Longbox collection, and over on Auction Alert, we're going to see what's on the eBays for Crusader of Centy, because this game is kind of rare. It's going to be a lot of fun. Let's go.
Going long. It is going long. Looking long. Going long. It is going long. Looking long.
So if you go over to the Patreon at patreon.com/2consoles2late, you can hear the full bonus podcast of Going Long, where I talk about my acquisitions and live streams. I'll just give you some bullet points here real quick. I picked up Alien Trilogy. It's a Doom clone. Haven't gotten very far with it. I picked up Twisted Metal. I said I wasn't going to do it, but I did. And you know what? I'm glad I did. I got it below price charting. And the latest acquisition is Chessmaster 3D. That one came from my local shop, Goodwill. And I think that's the one I'm going to be live streaming this Saturday at 7:30 in the morning. So if you go over to youtube.com/2consoles2late, every Saturday morning at 7:30, I'm live streaming one of the games from the PS1 Longbox collection. I do this in order to actually play the games, not just put them on the shelf and forget about them. The past live stream, I started to play Descent, and I just wasn't feeling it. I just didn't have enough coffee or something. So I played that for like maybe 15, 20 minutes, and then I popped in NHL Face Off and played, of course, the Penguins versus the Caps, right? It was a high-scoring affair. I didn't finish the game. I was losing to the Caps there, but it's kind of fun to play a sports title. But anyway, be sure to check out the live stream Saturday, YouTube, 7:30. Grab some coffee. See you there. That is the opening theme written by Mochikazu Shinoda. That is one of many songs we're going to hear from the soundtrack of Crusader of Centy. It's a wonderful soundtrack. It's pretty rare that I actually feature multiple tracks here on the podcast, but so rather than the Zelda fanfare, you know, I'm gonna do just gonna put songs in between all my bits, and then talk a little bit about them. So that's number one, the opening theme. But as I'm listening to that, I'm like, man, that sounds familiar. And at first I thought, was it Hill Street Blues, which was a detective crime drama in the 80s? It was not, but it was a show from the 80s. So we're going to play a little Name That Tune here at the podcast. This is an intro from an 80s, I guess I wouldn't call it a sitcom or a drama. But anyway, Name That Tune. Okay, here's a hint. The actor later went on and played a womanizing character named Barney, and not a purple dinosaur. All right, so if you know what it is, I'm not going to tell you. You have to drop me a comment on the interwebs and tell me what you think it is. And I'll tell you if you're right or not. I'll reply either way. It doesn't really, matter. But I'm not going to give the answer here. But doesn't it make you feel nostalgic for the 80s and those good old days of Toys R Us and Funko Land? The days of the NES? Yeah. I've been listening to this podcast, and it's pretty sickening, the amount of nostalgia in this one podcast. And it sounds like they're going to fucking cry. And it's getting to the point where I stopped listening to this podcast because it was just a little over the top with the nostalgia.
Stick it!
It's like, okay, you know what? I mean, during the 80s, I was like, what? Well, let's see here. 88, I was 7 years old, so a lot of it I don't remember. I mean, I remember the fact of Reagan, and I remember Challenger and stuff like that. But for the most part, I feel no nostalgia. And here at this podcast, we have no nostalgia because we're two consoles too late. And we're talking about the Crusader of Centy, which came out not in the 80s, but in the 90s, of 1994. So let's go. Let's talk about some video games. All right, so that is called Soleil Plaza. And that's the song that plays in the main town that you start in, called Soleil, in Crusader of Centy. Another wonderful track. Anyway, so let's establish a baseline, as I like to say here at Two Consoles Too Late. This is the podcast where we have no nostalgia for these video games, and we are playing these games for the first time. But in this case, that's not the case. I actually have played this game before and talked about it here on the podcast. If you go back to episode 74, I gave it brief lip service. And I talked about it after, for some reason, I decided to talk about baseball statistics. And once again, the Two Consoles Too Late podcast has since taken structure and form. And so if I'm going to do crap like that, head on over to the Going Long podcast over at the Patreon. Anyway, so that was back in September of 2022. And when I was playing it then, I was playing it on emulation, but I was playing it on my Wii. So since then, I have taken the ROM and I put it on my my Sega Genesis Mini. Because I can't afford that shit, all right? We're going to talk about that too. That Crusader of Centy is a very, very expensive video game. But that all being said, Crusader of Centy gets compared a lot to Zelda Link to the Past. And they are two very different games. But unfortunately, you cannot talk about Crusader of Centy without referencing Link to the Past, because Link to the Past is of the common mind. It's in the greater consciousness. People know Link to the Past. People don't know Crusader of Centy. So unfortunately, as I'm talking about Crusader of Centy, I'm going to sort of compare it with Link to the Past simply as a reference to kind of give an idea. But the games are very, very different. The themes of Crusader of Centy are, of humanity, compassion, ecology. We'll talk a little bit about that. And there's not a lot of that in Zelda. Zelda's just sort of like hack and slash. But it's nice to play a game, once again, on the Sega Genesis. I don't give the Sega Genesis a lot of love. Featured Rolling Thunder 2, James Bond 007. I briefly played Shadowrun for the Sega Genesis. And I played Castlevania Bloodlines on the Sega Genesis. So it's nice to pick up the Genesis controller and have some 3-button action. And being a Sega Genesis game filled with animals, the mascot of Sega makes a Easter egg cameo. Sonic appears on the beach sunbathing. So there's a little factoid for you. So let's get into this and talk about some Crusader of Centy, also known as Ragnacenty, also known as Soleil. All right, getting a little long in the tooth already. Jeez. Okay, so Crusader of Centy, known as Soleil, was developed by Nextech and it was published by Atlas late in the Sega Genesis life cycle. It was released June 16th, 1994 in Japan and North America, and it arrived at a time when the 16-bit era was slowly transitioning towards CD-based hardware and early 3D consoles. That is ChatGPT's way of saying the PlayStation and the N64 were here, and the Sega Genesis was going the way of the dodo bird, as was Sega, as we all know. But Atlas was still building its reputation outside of Japan, and it handled the American release. And with many of their titles in the 90s, distribution was small. Low print numbers would eventually push the game into highly collectible territory, but we're going to see that over on Auction Alert. Apparently, only 6,300 copies were made. The story of Crusader of Centy is not Link to the Past. We are not saving the princess in this one. In this one, a young boy named Corona, also another word for son, turns 14 and receives his father's sword in a symbolic coming-of-age ritual. But immediately the game pushes you into a darker realm, as it were. During the early hours, Corona loses the ability to speak with humans and can only communicate with animals and monsters. It's a narrative twist that forces the player to see the world from the perspectives of others. And you learn about the lives of the animals, their fears, their roles in the world, and the nature of the conflict between humans and monsters. I found this interview on Shmuplations talking with the developers of Crusader of Centy, and I'll put a link in the show notes to this article. And I'm just going to read a little snippet because it really kind of explains the game a little bit. This is from Yukihiko Tani, the main programmer. We had a lot of different ideas for this game, and I wanted to make sure we didn't have to cut any of them because of the programming. To that end, I pushed myself further than I ever have. Anyway, I hope players notice all the little details in things like footprints, the fireplaces, and the buckets. The character also has 8-way movement, so we carefully prepared 8 different animation patterns for each action. There should be something new to do in every map, and exploring them fully is definitely one of the appeals of Crusader of Centy. There's lots of different animal combinations too, so please find all the best killer combos. Yeah, that little snippet really kind of in a nutshell, sort of describes Crusader of Centy. So with a game like Link to the Past, as you move through the game, you acquire gadgets and weapons, and those gadgets and weapons allow you to move further in the game. But that is not the case with Crusader of Centy. With Crusader of Centy, to progress further, you meet animals along the way. And so, as an example, some of the animals are, the first animal you meet is a dog, and he allows you to throw your sword. You meet a cheetah that increases your movement speed, a penguin that grants ice abilities, and a lion that grants fire abilities. That's just a couple of the animals. And it's really interesting. And you can equip 2 animals during your gameplay as, I guess, kind of your party. And depending on which animals you equip, you get certain combo effects. That's what they call it in the game. And it really kind of made you think as you're playing the game, okay, if I combine the dodo bird with the lion, my sword gets stronger. So, traditionally in a game like Link to the Past, your sword gets better and better, and then eventually you get the Master Sword. Well, that's not the case here. You can upgrade your sword through adding animals to your party. So, I guess Crusader of Centy really gets compared to Link to the Past because they look very similar. They both have a top-down perspective. In both of the games, you can cut grass, and when you cut the grass, you get coins. In this, they're called malins, and Link to the Past, they're called, of course, rupees. And in this game, you don't have a sword beam like Link does. Instead, you can throw your sword. And it acts more like a boomerang than anything, which is really interesting. But as we heard in that interview, Corona can move 8 different directions. And to throw the sword diagonally becomes interesting. Unlike that pointy-eared fuck who can only move 4 different ways. But unfortunately, the sword play of Crusader of Centy is, I would say, off, inaccurate. As you're swinging your sword, I don't know what the hitbox is. There's something about the hitboxes in this game. Like, you'll be approached by an enemy who's moving rather slow. I mean, the game is not difficult. But as these enemies approach you, you're sitting there swinging and swinging and swinging your sword, and you're just not hitting them. And it became very frustrating in my gameplay. And eventually, one of the animals that you acquire is the Leviathan, who is an underwater dragon, which allows you to swing your sword faster, which helps, but at the same time, these collisions just aren't working. And in Crusader of Centy, Corona can jump. I was sitting here thinking, I was like, I don't think Link could jump in Link to the Past. So now it's like, okay, now that you can jump, you can access other areas, find some secrets, some money bags and stuff like that. But the jumping is also very imprecise, and there is platforming within the levels. And once again, these collisions, there's these crevices, and if you get too close to the edge of these pathways, you end up falling into these crevices. And there's like a little noise in the game while you're playing that, you're getting close to the edge, and then you're gone. And you lose a lot of apples. And apples is your measure of life because you keep falling in these crevices. So it got really frustrating. And I think the game suffered because of that. But I was playing this on my Sega Genesis Mini, and because the miracle of save states, I could sort of correct some of my errors. Because to go from one place to the other in some of these areas, I'd fall down these endless holes, and I'd lose like a whole row of apples. which is another thing that sort of has a beef with me. All right, so apples is your measure of life in Crusader of Centy, whereas in Zelda, it's hearts. So it looks very, once again, it looks very similar. But when you defeat enemies, they don't drop apples. To find the apples, you typically have to cut grass. The only place I could find where you could get a full refill of health is you have to go all the way back to Soleil village and talk to your mom. And I think you have to have the dog equipped, and she would fill up your life meter again. So right away, we're seeing some similarities with Link to the Past. We have our life meter looks like hearts, but they're not. They're apples. It tried to distinguish itself with the fact that you could jump, but the platform is completely imprecise. The sword just didn't work very well. Often you find yourself throwing the sword, not a sword beam, and you're in this top-down perspective. So if you want a deep dive into the similarities with Link to the Past, the Gaming Historian has a video on YouTube with something like 11 million views comparing the two games. And it's unavoidable, once again, that this game gets compared to Link to the Past. Because once again, I think they're two very different games. In Crusader of Centy, there are no weapon upgrades. Once again, you just have your sword, and depending on what animals you have equipped, your sword can, I wouldn't say, kind of does a little bit more damage. I used the lion, also known as Inferno. By equipping the lion, when you threw your sword, it turned into flames. I used that one a lot. But there are no other weapons other than your sword. And you do have a shield, but it's completely useless. If you want to block attacks, you had to press the C button on the controller, and the animals would get up in front of you. So that was like the only quote-unquote shield that you would have. But you're pictured carrying a shield, which doesn't make any sense. There's no shops in the Crusader of Centy, so you can't just buy like a bag of apples to up your life meter, which I think would have really helped. The only shops in the game, it's kind of sick when you think about it. You go in this place and you can buy some animal friends. And the animal friends that you can buy for 50 malins, I think it was a cat, a bat, and something called an egg bomb. And the cat would restore your life after you died. And I paid for many a cat in my gameplay. And the bats would make you indestructible for like 30 seconds. And the egg bomb, which I don't know what animal that was supposed to be, the egg bomb basically destroyed everything on the screen. So I think the Crusader of Centy would have been helped by, having some shops where you could just buy some apples, or a place where you could buy some apples, because you find yourself, after going from point A to point B, falling down multiple crevasses and losing like a whole line of apples. By the time you got to like a boss battle, you'd be low on health. And me being me, I kind of suffered for it. Once again, I had those miracle of save states, so I cheated a bit. But I wouldn't say that this game had dungeons in the traditional Zelda sense. There's some level, it feels like a dungeon, and they kind of have puzzles, but it wasn't an area that was like separate too much from the overworld. But we'll talk about the overworld map here in a bit. But so you have to combine your animal companions to have layered effects to give you different abilities. And I like that. I like that it was different, and I think it really distinguishes the game from Link to the Past. But the boss battles were really kind of unmemorable. Once again, not difficult. In no particular order, I'm just going to give some lip service to them here. The one boss, Georama, basically looks like a ravioli. The only thing you had to do was just switch between ice and fire attacks, but you had to have the penguin, you had to have the lion. So you would just switch between those two attacks, attack once with fire, attack once with ice. That came straight from Link to the Past. Whether they ripped it off, I don't know. But there's a boss battle in Link to the Past where you have to do a fire attack and then an ice attack. There's this rope boss. It looks like some logo, and I didn't look it up, but it's like the outline of this person, but he's made out of rope. And it's a really easy battle. He would just sort of swing his arms and try to hit you, and then he would shoot these. They're clearly, I guess, fists. All right, like his hands would detach, and these two fists would come after you. But they look like cocks. All right, they look like you were being chased by penises, and my mind went to the gutter into that. I'm sorry, but I don't think I was the only one there. So you had this rope boss, and then he would crumble into a pile of rope, and his heart would be exposed, and you'd have to hit the heart. And the bosses had like a damage meter, and I thought this was interesting. Their damage meter was green, where your life meter is red. I don't know, something about the color is like, that seems too good. That's just me. So anyway, you had this rope boss who, shoots rope fists at you. Very easy. Leviathan, he was an underwater dragon. That one was super easy. He'd just shoot fireballs at you, and you would swing your sword and shoot the fireballs back. Once again, seen that before in Zelda. And halfway through the game is Maldra. And Maldra is a big old dragon who swings his tail and tries to do damage there. And to defeat Maldra, you just have to get behind him and then throw your sword or whack his head. And it took a little bit, but he was easily defeated. But since I'm talking, since I mentioned Maldra makes this giant soliloquy after you defeat him. Whatever. That really kind of drives home the theme of Crusader of Centy. And they don't ram it down your throat, but it does get a little bit lengthy. So anyway, before I read the little soliloquy, I'm going to go back to that Schmuplations interview, because they kind of talk a little bit about, the theme and the story. This is from Yayoi Anda, a planner and producer from the Crusader of Centy. And these were all featured in a magazine called Beep. But this is a direct quote. I wrote the story myself, and because I don't like tearjerkers, instead I added a lot of twists and surprises. I think I went a little too far in some places, though, which caused the dialogue to get a bit lengthy. Yeah, it does get a little bit lengthy. So the speech made by Maldra the dragon, this is it. Foolish humans, I have tested you to teach you a valuable lesson. I took away your ability to talk to other humans and gave you a tie with animals and monsters. I thought that history tainted by human fighting and battle would change, but it proved to be a waste. Moreover, you have tainted this peaceful place as well. I shall return your language to you, but what is important is not the words, but to embrace that which you know is true in your heart. Look from others' point of views, and it will be clear like a fountain. I shall give the final judgment to those who cannot see this. Now is the time to change history. The laws of nature will exist no more. The crusade of Centy shall come to an end. Come to know the depths of man's sins. Yeah, they really kind of drive it home. The whole thing of empathy and compassion, just in that little speech. And unfortunately, some of the dialogue you have with the NPCs, it gets pretty heavy on all of that. The central theme is, are humans the heroes that they believe that they are? So you're forced to look at in this game, you see it from the perspective of the animals and human behavior and how we treat other animals and, the planet and deforestation and all that. There's a part where you're talking to someone and they say, I don't want to see another person, swinging a sword in this forest because all they do is chop down trees. So there's a lot of that in Crusader of Centy. Does the game suffer for it? little bit. Like once again, they don't really ram it down your throat, but it's a little heavy in parts. So yes, this game does get compared to Link to the Past, but once again, it's really driving home these themes. You don't have any weapons upgrades. You have these animals who become your friends, and they really drive the relationship between, humans and animals. And it's a little over the top, but it's not bad. So that is the Castle Frisia theme, which is the ice world of Crusader of Centy. And as I was hearing that song, it really reminded me of Phendrana, another ice world from Metroid. I thought the two, both being ice worlds, their themes were sort of quiet and contemplative. But Castle Frisia is one of the many regions in the world of Crusader of Centy. And the world design of Crusader of Centy is broken into hubs and regions that gradually unfold as Corona acquires new abilities and meets new animals. And other areas are Soleil Town, that's the village where you start, where all the humans are. The Rafflesia Playground, which basically was an obstacle course, and that was broken up into 3 different parts: beginner, intermediate, and expert. And after you finished each obstacle course, you would get a medal, and when you got all 3 medals, you would take them to the king, and I think he would upgrade your sword somehow. In my game, I did not do that. I only got the bronze and the silver medal. I didn't do the expert playground obstacle course thing. I might go back and try to do it, but I don't know. We'll see. Anyway, there's Dahlia Valley, Anemone Beach. That's where we see Sonic the Hedgehog sunbathing. Hot Daisy, Burn Daisy. It's kind of like a Mount Doom, or I'm drawing a blank on Link to the Past, but the fireballs are falling from the volcano, trying to damage Corona. Iris is another human village. Camellia Desert, Tower of Babel, and once again Castle Frisia, the ice zone. The overworld map of Crusader of Centy looked a lot like the overworld map of Super Mario World. That was my go-to, especially, with like each area being a little hub. But that all being said, a lot of my impression of playing Crusader of Centy was that it was a bit of a Metroidvania, because each animal would grant you a new ability, and that ability you could progress further on the map and further in the game. And you would have to backtrack and acquire items that you couldn't get before because you didn't have a certain animal in your party. So there is some Metroidvania in Crusader of Centy, which I really enjoyed. I enjoyed it a lot, which I think is similar to Link to the Past, because in Link to the Past, you would get like a hammer or whatever you would get that would let you go further. It's the same case here with Crusader of Centy. So graphically, the Crusader of Centy, I think, really kind of pushed the Sega Genesis hardware. It's a 16-bit game, and graphically it's very impressive. And I'm going to give a few examples of that. The parallax scrolling is very nice. When you get to the lava area, below you is a flow of lava. And when you're fighting the boss, Maldra, you're on an island in the clouds, and the clouds are going by behind you. Graphically, very impressive. So as an example, there's these things throughout the game, there's 15 of them, called golden apples. And these golden apples expand your life meter. It's like a piece of heart in Zelda, to give you a reference. Anyway, so one of these golden apples, you talk to this girl and she says, okay, you have to touch all the flowers in this field. And once you do that, they start spinning, or they're happy to see, or whatever the game says. So it takes you about 3 minutes. And you have to touch all these flowers in this field, make them all start spinning. And then you go back and you talk to the girl and she gives you a golden apple. And I thought that was really impressive. I don't know, like, if that's a limitation for the hardware of the Sega Genesis, but I was impressed. And another golden apple, you talk to a cow, and the cow says, "Okay, go stand in a field of flowers and jump on the one that isn't acting like the others." So all the flowers are turning counterclockwise, and you have to jump on the flower that's turning clockwise. I was using internet walkthrough, so I knew which flower to jump on because it was a little hard to differentiate which one was going clockwise in this field of counterclockwise flowers. But that was something else about this game, and my mind's kind of all over the place with this. But as you talk to these NPCs, they kind of give you hints of, okay, this is kind of what you have to do and where you have to go. I was using internet walkthroughs, so I kind of skipped all that. So, I mean, to like find some of these golden apples, there's one that's like hidden in a tree, and I don't know how you would ever have known it was there unless you were really paying attention. But so to do some time travel, the second half of the game is there's a lot of time traveling, another parallel with Link to the Past. But to do the time travel, you have to get these magic shoes. And so you talk to this old lady, and she's like, "Oh, I was able to time travel with these magic shoes." And I really tried to do this game without internet walkthroughs. I tried to take the advice from the developers, from that Shmuplations where they're saying, have fun and explore the world of Crusader of Centy, which I did. I enjoyed it. But to move things along, I had to do internet walkthroughs. But these NPCs did kind of give you a guide as to where you had to go. And there's little details in the game. Like when you're walking on Anemone Beach, behind you leave a trail of footsteps. And I thought, I don't know, me being me, I was impressed. I thought that was graphically kind of cool. When you go to the different villages and go in the different houses, you can jump in the fireplace, and then you're in the dark and you can see your eyeballs. I thought it's a nice little touch. And I once again, I was just thinking graphically that's impressive, and it's a fun little thing. So, however, Crusader of Centy does have noticeable lag because when you have multiple sprites on the screen, the gameplay seriously slows down, which was a bit of a disappointment, especially during boss battles, because you'd be trying to defeat a boss and everything would slow down, which got a little frustrating. So what is the reception and legacy of the Crusader of Centy in 1994? It received positive but modest coverage. Critics praised its gameplay, its art style, and the emotional depth of the game. It got compared greatly to Zelda Link to the Past, but it was noted for its distinct tone and thematic ambitions. However, distribution was limited. Once again, Atlas did not produce large quantities of the game, and the Genesis market was shrinking as attention started to shift towards the Sega Saturn, Sony PlayStation, and the Nintendo 64. And as a result, the game slowly faded into obscurity. But then, years later, the retro video game collecting community rediscovered it. And word-of-mouth, online discussion boards, and the rise of YouTube retro analysis videos all contributed to a renewed interest in the Crusader of Centy. And today, Crusader of Centy is considered a cult classic and a highly sought cartridge to be had. And its rarity, once again, I'm not sure how true that stat was, of 6,300 copies. That's not a lot. And that rarity has made it one of the most expensive US Genesis titles ever. And we're going to go over to the eBays and see what's over there, because we're not finding this shit on Shop Goodwill.
Auction. Alert.
So once again, only 6,300 copies of Crusader of Centy were made, apparently, making it extremely rare, making it just, I can't imagine a copy of Crusader of Centy coming up on the shop Goodwills. I would remember if this game came up. And once again, this game has only been on my radar for, I'd say, maybe like the last 3 years. I had no idea what it was. But I'm going to talk about that, after auction alert. So I went over to the eBays just to kind of see, okay, what's available. And the first listing right away, Crusader of Centy, complete in box with manual and insert. Looks really good from this, from this picture. $3,269. Plus $9.16 for delivery. If I'm paying $3,300 for a fucking video game, you better ship that shit for free, motherfucker. Come on, don't nickel and dime me. Yeah, you can stick it. Anyway, loose copy $450, loose copy $600. But there are repros here for like $60, which kind of had me scratching my head. Like, is that legal? Can you sell? I mean, isn't that basically piracy? There is a complete in box copy coming from Canada. That's $1,815, but shipping, delivery and import fees, Mr. Trump. Stick it. That's $82.19. So, another CIB just shows the game. $1,999, $2,000. So yes, copies of Crusader of Centy. Of those 6,300, there are some on the eBays. And once again, not on the shop Goodwills. To play Crusader of Centy, once again, I just download the ROM and put it on my Sega Genesis Mini. I do not own a copy of Crusader of Centy. And I'd be scared to have a video game that expensive. I mean, I'm a cheap fucking bastard, but this is definitely a game you would not find in the wild. And if you did, that's it. Just thank your lucky stars that you even found a copy in the wild. And hopefully someone didn't know what the hell they had. As I'm collecting the PS1 long box collection, the big game in the long box collection is Starblade Alpha. That's an $800 game. And I have these fascinations of like going to like the flea market and find it in some shitty bin, which is never going to happen. Games like this, you're just not going to find in the wild. So if you want it, you got to go over to the eBays. If you want to play it, you're probably going to have to emulate it. I know I came to Crusader of Centy because after the first Sega Genesis Mini, they came out with the Genesis Mini 2, and that had some Sega CD titles on there. And included on that was Crusader of Centy. And I was listening to a podcast at the time, and they were just kind of like really surprised that that game was put on the Sega Genesis Mini. So that's how I came to the game. I was like, what is this? It's a Zelda clone? I have to play it. But that was back in September of 2022. Here it is, 2025. I have gone on. I played the game. I finished the game. Once again, I didn't get 100% completion. To get the last golden apple, you had to pay a mermaid, which was really bizarre. You have to pay a mermaid who's in a field, nowhere near any water whatsoever. You have to pay this mermaid 800 malins. So you had to like farm malins. And I just didn't feel like doing that. So, in summation, if you want to play Crusader of Centy, you're going to have to emulate it. If you are made of buku dollars, you can go over to the eBays and get yourself a copy. All right, this song is Battle 3 from the Crusader of Centy. I forget which boss you're fighting when this song comes on. The only thing that this song was missing is like random sound bites from weird movies and Al Jurgensen just screaming his head off. I thought it just sounded like a little chiptune ministry to me, but that's me. I went over to the Instagrams and I put up a cover of Crusader of Centy asking what you thought about the game. And Mr. David Hughes, I would say, is a friend of the show. He's been on the podcast twice. Left a comment saying, it's a wildly rare game. I believe top 2 or 3 in price for Sega Genesis. It is easily available on a number of online shops digitally today. It has more RPG mechanics than Zelda titles. It's a fun game. And to that, Mr. Hughes, I agree. Once again, if you want to play this game, you're going to probably have to emulate it. But would I recommend it? Yeah. However, does it have the replayability that I look for in my video games? Not so much. If I was on a desert island and I had to play either Link to the Past or Crusader of Centy, I'm always going to go for Link to the Past, to which this game often gets compared. Just a little bit more depth over at Nintendo than they did at Sega. But hey, you know what? They tried, and they got a little preachy talking about humanity, but I don't think it was over the top. All right, well, I'm going to get out of here. Thank you for listening to the podcast. I've been the host, Jackson Keebler. You can check me out on the interwebs. Just go over to Google and type in 2 Consoles Too Late, and there I will be. Be sure to check out the live stream Saturday morning, 7:30. Different game from the PS1 Longbox collection. Once again, this upcoming live stream will be chess. Yes, playing some Chess Master, so good stuff. All right, and this Monday is December 15th. What day is that? It's Bill of Rights Day. Yes, back in 1791, the first 10 amendments of the Bill of Rights were enacted. So all of your freedom of speech and your right to own guns started back in 1791. But it's also another day of importance here at the podcast. It's my birthday. Yes, back in 1979, I was born. So I will be turning the big 4-6. Nothing big planned, just going to work. Got myself a new iMac for my birthday. That has me kind of pulling my hair out because it's already crapped out twice during this podcast. And for that, stick it, I have to say. But as always, have a good one. I love you. Be kind to each other. And goodbye. Crusader of Centy, known in Europe as Soleil, which is French for sun, was developed by Nextech and published by Atlas late in the Genesis life cycle. Late in the Genesis. God damn it.